3 people in this trial went to the same high school. Me, Darnella Frazier, and Chief Arredondo. We all went to the same high school, obviously at different times. My experience, Chief Arredondo's experience, Darnella Frazier's experience, all based on, we had the same perspective, sat in the same classrooms, saw the same chalkboards or whiteboards, the same perspective. But our perception of our experiences there is going to be much different. Ultimately, at the end of the case, when we're done with these arguments, the court will instruct you on how to deal with these biases and the perception issues. The court's final instructions will guide you to try to recognize your biases, recognize them, what we bring to the table, and analyze the evidence from the perspective of the evidence itself. So let's look at this incident on May 25th from the perspectives and perceptions of simply just 4 of the bystanders. Right? Charles McMillan, 61 years old, 3rd grade in education, grew up in the South. He described himself as a curious guy. He likes to know what's going on in his neighborhood, so he stops and he checks things out, right? His perspective, he's the first one who's dealing with these guys. He has more information because he sees the entirety of the situation. But his perception of the event is affected by his life's experiences. At the end of the night, ultimately what he said to Officer Chauvin was, "I hope you get home safely," because that's what he says to police officers every night.
Can you advise the fire department if they're still with you, they need to go to 36th Park to assist with the feeding on arrest?
That's one person's opinion.
But no, I gotta get him.
We gotta control this guy because he's a sizable guy.
Yeah, and I tried to get in the car.
Looks like he's probably on something.
But I'm just saying, you know, but no, I got nothing bad to say about it because you respect me, I'm gonna keep respecting you.
Right.
You have a good night. You go home safe to your family. They'll keep you the same.
Darnella Frazier. She's a 17-year-old high school student who, upon seeing the restraint of George Floyd, her response was to pull out the cell phone and start recording, and then subsequently upload it to Facebook, right? Her perception of the event and her perspective of the event. She's looking, she didn't even know that Officers Lane and King were there because her perspective was blocked by the squad car. But her perception, her response to the situation was to record it, and that's perfectly fine. But she began her recording at 8:20 and 51 seconds. Donald Williams, he's a 33-year-old professional mixed martial artist who arrived at 8:22 and 39. He had spent the day fishing with his son, stopping for a drink when he became aware of the incident. He described his view of this based upon his perception as a mixed martial artist, right? He has a set of experiences that caused him to react in a different way. What he perceived was happening was that Mr. Floyd was being choked with a blood choke. I think we're past this at this point. The paramedic reached in, touched the carotid artery. To have a person rendered unconscious through a choke requires the blockage of both carotid arteries. This was not a neck restraint. This was not a chokehold. He was upset. And that, again, is okay because his perception affected what he was seeing. Genevieve Hansen, right? 27-year-old female firefighter for the city of Minneapolis. She testified that when she walked into the scene, she described the crowd as upset. She said, "I walked into an upset crowd." She said that the other voices distracted me from getting the officer's attention. And she testified, again, based on her perspective, that Officer Chauvin appeared to have his hand in his pocket. She observed what she believed to be blood on the from Mr. Floyd's face being pressed into the pavement. She observed fluid coming from Mr. Floyd's body that she presumed to be urine. She testified that nobody ever told her that EMS or an ambulance was on the way. She asked about, when I asked her about the response time she would have expected, 3 minutes. When I told her that paramedics had been called about 5 minutes prior to her arriving on scene, no way, because her perception is 3 minutes. But when you look at the things that Miss Hansen saw, whether it be from her perspective or her perception, there can always be more to the story. The blood coming from Mr. Floyd's nose was why they called EMS in the first place. You've seen the pictures. He injured his nose during the struggle, or his face during the struggle in the squad car. The fluid that she described as potentially being urine, we know that that's fluid coming from the undercarriage of the squad car.
I cannot breathe.
Officer Chauvin specifically told her an ambulance was coming when she first came on scene.
Don't come over here. Don't come over here.
Off of the sidewalk.
Yeah, we need you to keep some distance. Yeah, the ambulance coming.
Yep, we got an ambulance coming. The computer-aided dispatch reports clearly show what time EMS was called. So Genevieve Hansen has a perspective and a perception. And what she observed was not consistent with the actual evidence. But remember, we don't look at this incident from the perspective of a bystander. We do not look at this incident from the perspective of the people who were upset by it. We look at it from the perspective of a reasonable police officer. A reasonable police officer, when confronted with these bystanders, would know everything that had occurred up to that point. 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. They know all of that information. The bystanders do not. A reasonable police officer would understand that his actions were actually being recorded. Take the bystanders out of it. Officers wear cameras for a very specific reason, to record their actions, so they know they're being recorded. Officers are aware of the placement of city cameras. You're in a high retail, you've got gas stations, restaurants, convenience store, high surveillance. Right? Reasonable police officers know this. They would know if citizens take out their cell phones and start filming.